Hello and welcome to episode 16 of Toke TV, where we bring you the biggest in cannabis and hemp news stories every week. I'm Steve Elliott, the editor of TokeSignals.com, and I'll be guiding you through the news. First of all, let's take a look at our bud pick of the week. And this week, there's a story goes with the picture. This picture was taken right at the end of this plant's life, right before she was harvested. It's basically a goodbye hug. This plant is a juicy fruit strain, and she is now drying. This picture was taken 1 week ago, and you may be interested how she's coming along now. Well, let's bring her on camera here. And as you can see, she's coming right along. She's going to be very soon ready and feels like she's exactly where she should be at this stage of the curing process. Let's do the news, shall we? In Michigan, on Tuesday, which was election day, there were three big victories. Lansing, Ferndale, and Jackson voters all approved marijuana legalization in Michigan. These three cities approved ordinances to legalize possession of small amounts of marijuana, reportedly bringing up to 14 the number of cities statewide in Michigan that have removed all criminal penalties for personal use amounts of cannabis. Voters in Ferndale, a suburb of Detroit, approved an ordinance that would allow possession or transfer of less than an ounce of marijuana with a whopping 69% of the vote. This measure applies to adults 21 and older on private property. Lansing voters approved a similar measure by 63%, and Jackson, Michigan voters approved with 61% of the vote. The Lansing measure is slightly different from the other two in that it enacts a change to the city charter rather than updating an ordinance. Recreational marijuana, of course, is still illegal under both state and federal law. The public is far ahead of most politicians on this issue, as evidenced by the overwhelming support for medical marijuana when it was on the statewide ballot several years ago, as well as the decriminalization of small quantities of marijuana in cities like Ann Arbor, Detroit, Flint, and Grand Rapids, Lansing Mayor Berg Bernero said. Detroit, Grand Rapids, Flint, and Ypsilanti all passed similar measures last year, and city commissioners in Kalamazoo last year unanimously approved an ordinance that reduces fines and sentences for marijuana possession. In Ann Arbor, home of the annual Hash Bash, the city council passed an ordinance back in the early 70s, making the penalty for marijuana possession a small fine. Jackson Police Chief Matthew Hines was unhappy that the new ordinance would make life difficult for the cops, according to his view of things. It's a never-ending process to try to keep the officers abreast. What is the most recent legislation? What are the most recent court decisions, he complained. Well, Chief Hines, if you don't want to stay abreast of the law, maybe, just maybe, you shouldn't be a police officer, you think? Chief Hines also complained about a recent visit to Seattle, Washington, where state voters legalized marijuana last year. It struck me as odd, the chief said. I'm walking down the street in a populated municipality with adults and young kids, just a complete mix of people, and here are people smoking marijuana in public. It was foreign to me. Get used to it, Chief. Both Michigan Governor Rick Snyder and Attorney General Bill Schuette, both Republicans there in the state of Michigan, have objected to the new city ordinances, but voters don't seem to be paying a lot of attention. A letter written by Attorney General Schuette's chief legal counsel, Matthew Schneider, said that regardless of whether the proposed amendment is approved by the voters, marijuana will remain a controlled substance under state and federal law. Activists are hoping that Tuesday's votes will spur action in the Michigan legislature, where some legislators this year floated the idea of legalizing cannabis and collecting tax money to fix the highways. Also on election day, good news from Maine, where Portland became the first city on the East Coast to legalize marijuana, and it was a landslide vote there as well. Voters overwhelmingly approved ballot question 1, and this ordinance removes all penalties for adult possession of small amounts of cannabis. Unofficial totals showed the proposal passing with 67% of the vote, with roughly 9,900 yes votes and roughly 4,800 no votes. This city ordinance allows people 21 and older to possess up to 2.5 ounces of marijuana and is seen by many activists as a foot in the door to statewide legalization. The immediate effects, however, are unclear. Portland Police Chief Michael Sawchuk said that regardless of the vote, officials will continue enforcing Maine state law, under which possession of up to 2.5 ounces of marijuana will result in fines of $350 to $1,000, along with a civil summons. And selling or providing pot to others can result in criminal charges. The city should respect the voters and not arrest or fine adults for marijuana possession, according to David Boyer, who is the Maine political director for the Marijuana Policy Project. We call on city officials to stop the bleeding, Boyer said. It's time for the state of Maine to follow Portland. MPP plans to try to legalize marijuana statewide through the Maine legislature, according to Boyer. If that doesn't work, it will attempt to get a statewide referendum on the 2016 ballot, he said. The MPP spent more than $10,000 on the Portland legalization ordinance campaign. Portland's vote will energize the voters in Maine, according to State Representative Diane Russell, who has already submitted 2 unsuccessful bills in the legislature, which would tax and regulate marijuana like alcohol. One of them fell just 4 votes short in the House of Representatives. Volunteers have been working tirelessly to make Portland the first city on the East Coast to legalize marijuana for adults. And tonight we celebrate, Representative Russell said. This is truly a victory for science, for common sense, and for liberty. We already successfully regulate marijuana for medical use, and with tonight's vote, it's now clear Mainers are ready to move forward responsibly, regulating all adult marijuana sales, Representative Russell said. It's time to stop rewarding the drug cartels and start rewarding responsible business owners while funding important state priorities with new tax revenue. We hope this resounding vote in Portland sends a loud and clear message, not just to lawmakers in August, but to lawmakers nationwide, according to normal. We, the people, are ready for marijuana legalization, and it is well past time for legislators to listen to their constituents and push for an end to the failed policy of prohibition. When asked if Portland will sue to block the new legalization ordinance, City Attorney Danielle West Chuda said, at this time, the city has not decided what steps, if any, it will take with regard to the ordinance. In Colorado on Election Day, voters there approved heavily taxing newly legal marijuana sales. The voters approved a statewide ballot measure imposing a special excise tax on legal marijuana at both the wholesale and retail levels. The Denver Post called the election with Proposition AA ahead 65 to 35, with 65% of precincts reporting. Retail marijuana sales are scheduled to begin on January 1st in localities throughout Colorado, including the state's largest city, Denver, and they will begin in other cities throughout 2014. These taxes, approved by voters on Tuesday, make cannabis one of the most heavily taxed consumer products in the state, according to John Ingold at the Denver Post. According to the state's voter guide, Proposition AA is expected to bring in $67 million a year, with $27.5 million going towards school construction, as specified in Amendment 64, the legalization measure approved last year by voters. The rest will go towards paying for regulation of legal marijuana stores. Proposition AA was referred to the ballot by the Colorado General Assembly in accordance with Amendment 64, and that is the legalization initiative approved by state voters in 2012 to regulate marijuana like alcohol. Colorado is demonstrating to the rest of the nation that it is possible to end marijuana prohibition and successfully regulate marijuana like alcohol, according to Mason DeVert, Director of Communications at the Marijuana Policy Project. MPP supported Proposition AA and in fact was the largest financial backer of the Amendment 64 campaign in 2012. It is only a matter of time before voters and lawmakers in other states recognize the benefits and adopt similar policies, according to DeVert. Now, Proposition AA creates a 15% excise tax on wholesale sales of marijuana for adult use. That is, between a cultivation facility and a retail store is where that tax will kick in. The first $40 million of that raised each year will be directed toward the state's public school construction program. Proposition AA also establishes a 10% special sales tax on retail marijuana sales, which will be applied in addition to standard state and local sales taxes. Passage of this measure underscores the benefits of taxing and regulating marijuana sales instead of forcing them into the underground market, according to Divert. Instead of benefiting drug cartels, marijuana sales will generate tens of millions of dollars annually for the state's public school construction program. The Colorado Legislative Council staff estimate that Proposition AA will generate $27.5 million in annual excise tax revenue and $39.5 million in annual state sales tax revenue, with $6 million of that sales tax revenue directed back to localities. The revenue from the new 10% sales tax will be used to fund the regulatory structure, including enforcement of the laws for the testing, tracking, and labeling of retail marijuana, and measures to prevent the diversion of retail marijuana to individuals under 21 years old. In Washington, the news isn't quite so good, where the Liquor Board, as we have covered, is poised to gut the medical marijuana law by way of implementing the recreational legalization law, I-502. Medical marijuana patients are apparently seen as bad for profits if they are continued to allow to grow their own. The Washington State Liquor Control Board, which had its alcohol selling duties taken away by voters, only to be put in charge of recreational marijuana by legalization measure I-502, is unfortunately now in charge of medical cannabis as well as recreational marijuana. Despite last fall's promises that I-502, which legalizes possession of up to an ounce of pot, wouldn't affect medical marijuana, and assurances that the two systems would be maintained separately, it didn't take very long for state bureaucrats to extend the WSLCB's authority to include medicinal cannabis as well as recreational marijuana. Now, the board has extended the deadline to submit public comment for the draft recommendations regarding medical marijuana. These recommendations aren't good for the community, so you may want to offer your input if you're a stakeholder in Washington State, either a patient or a caregiver or otherwise concerned. This new deadline is November the 13th, and complete information on how to submit comments is in the article on tokesignals.com. The medical cannabis system, which has been working for 15 years now, since voters overwhelmingly approved it back in 1998, has, well, what do you know, it's suddenly deemed a pressing problem which needs regulation. And surprise, surprise, once the Liquor Control Board bureaucrats were asked for their input on medical marijuana, they recommended that both channels of safe access for patients, home growing and through collectives, be shut down, as if the bureaucrats are afraid that their mass-produced, overtaxed pot wouldn't be able to compete with patient collectives. Top officials, both in the LCB and in the Washington legislature, have expressed the opinion that more than 90% of all medical cannabis patients in the state are faking it. So the nastily cynical plan seems to be, since they believe practically all of us are faking it, let's treat them like the recreational users they really are and make money off of them. Medical marijuana patients in Washington have basically been told they're bad for profits if they don't participate in the recreational legalization scheme of I-502. And more than that, they're being forced to participate under these recommendations. Even when you put aside the questions of the affordability of cannabis for patients if they are no longer allowed to grow their own, safe access remains problematic under I-502. Only 21 recreational marijuana stores are permitted to open in Seattle under I-502. Currently, there are more than 200 medicinal cannabis dispensaries operating in Seattle. How can reducing the number of access points tenfold be called preserving safe access for patients? Meanwhile, under these recommendations, which have a decidedly non-medical body, the Liquor Control Board, for goodness sakes, in charge of the entire supply of marijuana in the state, which patients literally have nowhere else to go for the medicine that to many of them is crucial for life and health. The Liquor Control Board, of course, is completely unqualified to make the kinds of medical decisions. And they are going to be completely controlling the state's entire supply of cannabis, inexorably moving towards gutting medical marijuana in Washington. The board claims that there are no currently legal medicinal cannabis businesses in the state. This would come as quite a surprise to hundreds of tax-paying access points with business licenses. And this pronouncement comes despite the fact that the RCW 69.51A clearly allows the formation of patient collectives and the exchange of money for marijuana within those collectives. Millions of dollars are currently being paid to the Washington Department of Revenue by medicinal cannabis businesses, which, according to the Liquor Control Board, don't exist. According to KIRO in Seattle, the department collected $2.3 million in taxes from 85 medical marijuana dispensaries in the state in 2012. One collective owner, Ryan Kunkel of Seattle Access Point Have a Heart, recently paid about $110,000 in cash at the offices of the department. Now, as the Liquor Control Board's recommendations for medical marijuana currently stand, they would eliminate all medical marijuana home grows and all collective gardens, effectively taking out dispensaries as well. Eliminate the affirmative defense for medical marijuana patients by instituting a mandatory patient registry and a designated provider registry. Eliminate the current process used to add new conditions to those authorized for medical marijuana, forcing patients to lobby for legislation to cover new conditions. It would force patients to obtain all their marijuana through recreational I-502 stores, where the employees are expressly forbidden to discuss medicinal uses of cannabis. It would reduce current patient possession limits from 24 ounces to 3 ounces, and it would eliminate concentrates such as Rick Simpson oil and hash oil, which are crucial for the treatment regimens and continued health of many patients. 15 years of medical cannabis laws, legal precedents, and now people's lives and livelihood are being threatened by a small group of government bureaucrats looking to expand their authority, according to John Novak, an activist who works with 420leaks.org. We have the public documents to prove this has been their plan all along, Novak said. Don't forget to offer the input to the Liquor Control Board. The email address and the physical address are on the story. Liquor Control Board poised to gut Washington's medical marijuana law on tokesignals.com. In New Mexico, a really disturbing story. A routine traffic stop there in New Mexico after a guy ran a stop sign turned into a nightmare 14-hour anal cavity search for drugs. He's now filed a lawsuit against the police claiming this invasive search violated his civil rights. This man in Deming, New Mexico was subjected to this 14-hour search for drugs after allegedly just running a stop sign, according to recently discovered documents. No drugs at all were ever found. And now David Eckert is suing police officers and the doctors who conducted the horrendous search, which occurred back in January. After searches of his car and his person revealed no drugs, officers held Eckert until a judge issued a warrant because they alleged he appeared to be clenching his buttocks. Officers then took Eckert to Hilo Regional Medical Center in a neighboring county after doctors at Mimbres Memorial Hospital in Deming refused to conduct the search on ethical grounds, according to court documents. What happened was the nightmarish 14 hours where Eckert's abdominal area was x-rayed. No narcotics were seen. They then performed an exam with their fingers. No narcotics were found. They performed a second exam. No narcotics were found. They penetrated him to insert an enema a first time, forced him to defecate in front of the officers, searched the stool. No narcotics were found. They did this a second time, a second enema. No narcotics were found. They x-rayed him No narcotics were found. They prepared the man for surgery. They sedated him, and they performed a colonoscopy, where a scope with a camera was inserted into his anus, rectum, colon, and large intestines. No narcotics were found. Throughout this ordeal, Eckert protested. He never gave doctors at the Gila Medical Center consent to perform any of these medical procedures. After multiple anal probes, enemas, x-rays, and colonoscopies, no drugs were found, and Eckert was released with no charges. He later received a bill for his torture from the hospital, which threatened to turn him over to a collections agency if he failed to pay. What happened to David Eckert was highly unusual, even in the context of the aggressive policing so often associated with the drug war, according to Ethan Nadelman, Executive Director for the Drug Policy Alliance. But this case is just one of the many tens or even hundreds of thousands of police interventions, both legal and illegal, each year, in which citizens have their homes, cars, and bodies searched, sometimes violently, all in the name of a futile and unwarranted criminalization of drug control in America. Now, Eckert, understandably, is suing for compensatory and punitive damage for this horrific ordeal that he was put through by the police. If the officers in Hidalgo County and the city of Deming are seeking warrants for anal cavity searches based on how they're standing, and the warrant allows doctors at the Gila Hospital of Horrors to go in and do enemas and colonoscopies without consent, then anyone can be seized, and that's why the public needs to know about this, according to Eckert's attorney, Shannon Kennedy. The DPA's Anthony Papa spent 15 years in prison for a nonviolent drug offense. He knows the trauma that Eckert felt all too well. I went through a body cavity search, and it was, without a doubt, the most dehumanizing experience I have ever had, said Papa of the Drug Policy Alliance, where he's media relations manager. It totally traumatized me, and after 20 years, I still have nightmares about it. More insanity from Arizona, where we have a prosecutor telling the Arizona Supreme Court that smoking marijuana weeks ago is enough to charge you for DUI. There's nothing wrong with charging a motorist who smoked marijuana a month ago with impaired driving, an Arizona prosecutor told the state Supreme Court on Tuesday. Susan Luter, a deputy Maricopa County attorney, admitted that carboxy-THC, a metabolite of marijuana, often shows up in drug tests a month after the last time an individual used cannabis. She didn't even argue with her own expert witness, who said that the presence of this metabolite does not indicate someone is impaired. But as strange as it seems, Luter stood before the Arizona Supreme Court and told the justices that it is perfectly legal under Arizona law to prosecute someone for driving under the influence of marijuana when they haven't smoked for a month and they are not impaired at all. Those convicted of driving while drugged can lose their driver's license for up to a year in Arizona. Chief Justice Rebecca Birch of the Arizona Supreme Court wondered where exactly the line is if someone can be charged for impaired driving a month after using marijuana. She questioned if Luter's logic falls apart if carboxy-THC can be detected a year or even 5 years after someone last used pot. Luter brushed aside such arguments, saying it's up to the legislature to decide. If Luter's arguments prevail, Arizona's 40,000 legal medical marijuana patients will effectively be banned from driving, since the human body's endocannabinoid system holds on to marijuana metabolites for as long as it can. Your body treats marijuana more as a nutritional supplement than as a toxin. The body expels substances like cocaine, alcohol, and methamphetamine as quickly as possible, usually in 3 to 5 days. It holds on to marijuana metabolites for as long as it can, at least a month. The current Supreme Court case stems from a driver being cited for a traffic violation, and upon being given a blood test, was found to have carboxy-THC in his system. He was then charged with driving with an illegal drug or its metabolite in his body. A trial judge threw the case out, but the Court of Appeals differed, saying the DUI laws must be interpreted broadly. That appeals court ruling effectively bans anyone with any carboxy-THC in their blood from driving, according to attorney Michael Allered, who called that an absurd result. Supreme Court Justice Scott Bales seemed all too willing to make excuses for the intrusive and inaccurate drug testing, saying that the fact remains that anyone who tests positive for carboxy-THC had in fact used marijuana at some point. Justice Bales claimed that there isn't any way for police to extrapolate backwards to determine when that person was impaired. How convenient for them, eh? If we don't know that, wouldn't it be responsible for the legislature to prohibit driving while you have carboxy-THC in your system? Bales cluelessly asked. But a simple ban on driving with carboxy-THC in the blood isn't rationally related to protecting the public from impaired drivers, according to lawyer Elliott. The justices haven't yet indicated how they will rule. In the United States, if you have been convicted on a marijuana charge, there's a law scholarship you might want to take a look at. They're looking for criminals for this law scholarship. Now, a criminal record usually limits your opportunities, but now there's a $1,000 law school scholarship available where applicants must prove that they've been in trouble with the law. The Alphaman Law Firm, based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, says the idea is designed to reward those who have made better choices after a conviction, those who have managed to turn their lives around and intend to pursue a career in criminal defense. There's a real need for passionate attorneys in criminal defense, according to Avery Alphaman, the firm's founder. Nothing instills a great passion for justice like having suffered through the process yourself. That's where the Alphaman Law Firm Criminal Defense Scholarship comes in, and Alphaman isn't alone in thinking a criminal record shouldn't be a barrier to making a better life. There are just too many ways to run afoul of the law for anyone to think they are immune, Alphaman said. A mistake can easily lead to arrest or jail. Attempts to determine just how many criminal statutes exist have failed because there are so many. An estimate from the government in the 1980s put it at about 3,000 in the federal system alone. Shortly afterward, another study from the American Bar Association said that was too low a figure, but they couldn't come up with a better number. Adding in state crimes only makes the situation worse. For many, avoiding a criminal record has become more a matter of luck than of being a good citizen. By offering a scholarship to those adversely affected, the criminal defense lawyers at Alphaman Law hope to help those most in need and bring some awareness to the problem. When a simple marijuana possession charge can ban someone from federal aid, there's something wrong with the system, said Alphaman. As a society, we need to rethink what it means when we slap on the label of criminal and how it adversely affects someone's life. To apply for this scholarship, applicants must write a short essay about their experience with the law and submit proof of a police record. Applications for the scholarship will be taken until May 31st, 2014, and the award decision will be made in August. More information and an application form can be found at aacriminallaw.com, and you can find that link on the Hemp News story. Before we go this week, I want to point you at another story you don't want to miss. It's my weekly column in the Seattle Weekly, and it's called Let Marijuana Patients Grow Their Own. And of course, as we have examined, a complete ban on home growing by medical marijuana patients is one of the proposed rules unveiled by the board, along with the proposed ban on collective gardeners, which would effectively take out dispensaries. And what they are doing, of course, and even they acknowledge this, is trying to force patients through the recreational system rather than the existing medical marijuana system. You want to take a look at that on seattleweekly.com. Let marijuana patients grow their own. I hope you have a great week, and I hope you'll choose to come back and catch up on the news again with us next week on Toke TV. Until that time, I think it would be a great idea to stay lifted.